Hi, I'm Lisa Zabaniak from Life Like You Mean It, and today we're talking about the hardest part of a spiritual awakening. So, this video is in three parts. First, we're going to have a look at the dark night of the ego, which is, in my opinion, the most difficult part of a spiritual awakening. So, we're going to talk about what that is. Part two, we're going to have a look at the common symptoms that you can expect or that you might have been going through that gives you a little bit of a hint that you are actually in the dark night of the ego. And number three, we're going to talk about the best strategy that I have ever come up with in helping to move through the dark night of the ego as quickly as possible for your highest good. So let's get started. So before we dive in to stage one here of this video, I just want to point out I've made two other videos about this. The first one that might be of real interest to you is the truth about a spiritual awakening, which you can find over here. Just click on that card there and go and watch that very quick video that just breaks down the myths versus the truth about a spiritual awakening. And the second video that is of interest for you is the stages of a spiritual awakening. So you can check this card out here and go and see that video. That one is going to walk you through your typical stages so you can get a better idea of where you might be in your spiritual awakening. So on to stage one of this video. So in this part, we are going to talk about the dark night of the ego. This is one of the many stages of a spiritual awakening, and it tends to be the first stage where we start to have difficulty. So we've probably experienced some sort of bliss in our awakening and starting to actually feel a connection. And now all of a sudden, if we're not aware of what is going on, this stage can actually come and smack us right in the face and can really feel, quite honestly, like we've actually done something wrong. Right? If we're not aware that this is part of a spiritual awakening and a huge part of your spiritual awakening, we can very easily mistake this dark night of the ego as actual punishment or a sign that we are not on our right path, which is far from the truth. So, what is the dark night of the ego? This is essentially the shadow work that comes up for us in our awakening. It's the opportunity for us to heal. It's the opportunity for us to raise our awareness of what has gone on in our life so far, the role that we have played in that, the role that we have played in the lives of other people, and to take responsibility for that, including the responsibility for our own suffering. It has us look deep at our own behavior, our own actions and reactions. And if we have experienced some negative experiences before, whether that is trauma or just relationship breakdowns or whatever, then those things that have not healed yet start to come back up to the surface. And so that brings me to part two of our video, which is this common signs and symptoms that you are actually going through the dark night of the ego. So, first of all, that's going to look very, very different for every person because, of course, you're a unique individual that has had your own life experiences. But what will be common, the common thread that will be amongst all of us, is that we will need to take a look at past experiences. That doesn't mean that we have to relive them. If we've been through trauma, I have survived 10 years of child abuse. I have not had to go back and relive any of those traumatic physical, emotional, and sexual experiences that I had. But I did have to go back and look at those experiences in a different way, to be open to the possibility that there was lessons for me to learn there and opportunities for me to heal within there, which then opens up very big life lessons for me. So it's a perspective shift in my example. But in many times, what I hear from other people is that they get quite emotional. Their emotions get heightened in the dark night of the ego. And that can go to either extreme when I say heightened, really, because they can be what feels like being over emotional or very their moods are shifting very, very quickly. They can also be on the other end of the spectrum where it feels like they're going into a deep depression, where they have no emotion, where it's just the same emotion all the time that they can't break themselves free from. Now, the reason why this is part of the dark night of the ego is because our emotions are a direct reflection of our balance in our bodies, right? Of letting us know that our thought patterns are not in alignment, that our energetic field is not in alignment. It's an opportunity for us to put our attention where the attention needs to be. And so it's always a good thing to allow yourself to actually experience whatever emotions you are experiencing. And we'll get to that in the next part of this video. But for this, you could be looking back at past events with new, fresh eyes, something that you thought that you had healed before, and all of a sudden it comes back up. Maybe a trigger gets poked by something that somebody does or says, right? Something happens that causes you to be reflective. You start going inwards. You start to realize, wow, I have this behavior trait, for example, that I thought was just a funny little quirky thing about my personality, when in actual fact, it's a trauma response. And so now you've got the opportunity to deal with that response to that trauma. So you see what I mean by, if you're not aware that this is part of the spiritual awakening, it can feel very heavy. It can feel like it doesn't have a purpose except to make you feel like you were on the wrong track, right? All the bliss that you experienced before in the earlier stage of your awakening feels like that was just, a tantalizing taste of what could be, but you're not deserving of that because now you're going through these types of emotions and memories and, experiences with having to shift things and seeing different aspects of your life in a different way. But the truth is, that is the best part of the spiritual awakening. Now, another thing that I'd like to bring up here that is very, very common is that as you are going through this, as you are having these different shifts in your understanding, where you are realizing parts of your personality, parts of your behavior, parts of the way that you react, the way that you perceive your world, all being based on your previous experiences, starting to look at those things differently. What starts to happen for many people is they start to have a complete and total shift in themselves. And what I mean by that is they start to question everything. They question all of their behaviors, right? Once you start to realize that there's something that you do that you thought was cute and lovely and just part of your, cutesy personality, and then you realize that that was a trauma response, something that you started to create for yourself in order to keep yourself safe, and that has just become habit. And then you've lost track of the fact that that's really what its purpose is, and you've started thinking that it's part of your cutesy personality. When you start to have that awareness, you start to question everything else about yourself as well. Then you start questioning everything about what you think you know. Then you start questioning everything about what you want. Because what happens is the dark night of the ego allows you to see where there are wounds in your ego and allows you to go in and heal them. This is also called inner child work, right? And when you go in and you heal these aspects, you start to realize that, for a lot of people, anyways, start to realize that a lot of our big life goals are driven by the ego. And when we start to heal the ego, when we start to heal the inner child, when we start to create balance within our energetic field again, within our thoughts, bringing them into alignment with who we are, we start to change what it is that we actually want. Side note, if you are loving this video, and I know that you are if you're still here, so I've got something really wonderful for you. I'm currently working on a YouTube series about working with the moon, doing the shadow work to get ready to release what it is that you were ready to release for the full moon, and then working with the new moon to bring in something that is beautiful to replace that what you just released. And I'm doing it for every single chakra. This is a beautiful complement to your spiritual awakening, particularly the dark night of the ego. This might be exactly what you need to help you in going through this stage of your spiritual awakening. So if that's of interest to you, go ahead and click that card and start watching that series now. So let's move on to part 3, which is the biggest, best strategy that has ever worked for me in the different spiritual awakenings that I have gone through and in my talks with other people as well. And that is surrender. Now, surrender is a very interesting concept. This is the idea that we want to surrender to a higher power, surrender to our higher power, surrender to the trust that we have within ourselves. And in this case, surrender to the knowledge that this is part of our spiritual awakening. This is for us. This isn't moving against us. This isn't happening to us. That this is part of our spiritual awakening. And when we come out the other side of all of this work, we will be able to look back with hindsight and go, wow, that was incredible, right? It didn't always feel great, but it was incredible. We have a trust in ourselves that that will happen, a trust in the universe that that will happen, right? A belief in ourselves and something bigger than ourselves, which is actually ourselves, right? We are more than just this body, right? We are more than our thoughts. We are way more than what our ego is, right? We are the universe. And so when we are looking at getting through the dark night of the ego, the most challenging part of a spiritual awakening, we want to raise our awareness to this is what is happening and surrender to it. Do the work. Allow yourself to move through it. Stop resisting. And that is what surrender really basically is in my frame of it, is the absence of resistance. And so this is difficult if you don't realize that you are going through a dark night of the ego. You don't realize that this stage is a huge part of a spiritual awakening. Then you will do what most people do when they start getting confronted by different perspectives that they have of themselves, different belief patterns that are in place, right? Different personality quirks that start to come up to the surface. You start to see it in the reflection of other people and your circumstances, and it starts to become heavy and difficult. You do what most people do and you shut down, right? You say, nope, putting that way back in its box, right? We're just going to push that down there. We're going to tie a great big ribbon. You know what? Let's just put a great big chain around that with a huge padlock and throw away the key. I'm not looking at that. I'm not bringing that back up, right? You assume that what you're going to go through is suffering. And what you don't realize is that by not doing it, you are suffering. This is your opportunity to break the chain, to break the cycle, to stop the suffering. And that goes by looking within. So the sooner you accept what is happening, as soon as you stop resisting what is coming up for you, look at it as opportunities and then do the work that is required to learn the lesson, heal the inner child, heal the wounded ego, whatever it is that is required that is coming up for you as an individual, then the faster you will move through this phase. And that means it might only take weeks, it might take months. And if you are resisting, it might take years, right? If you are resisting, you might never come out of this phase, right? So we want to surrender to it. And that involves acknowledging, raising our awareness that this is actually what's happening. I hope you loved this video as much as I did. I love to serve you in this way. Please go ahead and subscribe now if you haven't already so that you don't miss any more videos from me. Bless.